Hey everybody, thanks for joining us for Pact. I'm the P, Peter Coffin. This is ACD, Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor, Master of Science. Together, we are Pact. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on your favorite podcast service. Also, leave us a glowing review on Audible and Apple Podcasts. We are a 5-star podcast.
Not 3, not 4, 5. I'm a 5-star man.
Help us keep the lights on by becoming a patron at patreon.com/pactpod. That's PACDPOD. Your monthly support gets you into our Discord server, gets you exclusive content, and you see some content before everyone else. We've also got fantastic Pact merch. Finally, please tell your friends. We rely so big on word of mouth. We stream 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturdays. Thank you very much for tuning in. Commodities, the basic unit of capitalism.
What is a commodity? A product made explicitly for exchange.
It can be a service too, as long as a service has a use value.
Yeah. Can an experience be a commodity? Yes, absolutely.
Well, like a mega church, they bring in tons of money, basically convincing people that they're healing them.
Any service, any object, any action, any experience that can be exchanged in value for something else. That is a commodity. That's all it is. Are things produced for gifting commodities?
No. Let's say you produce an object or you do a service for your family or for somebody for a gift. That is not a commodity because you're not doing it for the sake of exchange. You are doing it simply out of the goodness of your heart, because you promise to, survival, you love your family, etc. Like, these are all reasons why you would do something for someone, and it's just a simple human relation as opposed to a market exchange.
Right, one that is commodified, one that is exchanged in the market for something else. But nah, man, let's say you have 2 cows.
Let's say you have 2 wolves inside of you.
When 2 wolves get inside you.
So, this is a simple thing. It's really not a difficult thing to understand. Commodities are, again, the basic unit of capitalism. We have a market, that's how they circulate, et cetera, et cetera. And back in Marx's day, it was very simple to figure out where a commodity was coming from, what it was, because the relations weren't mystified in any way. You pick up a thing, that's a commodity, whoa, that's it. We know where that was made, where it came from, what it was made with, who got the money. It's pretty simple to figure that stuff out with a traditional commodity. However, we live in different times. We oftentimes hear, Marx, his analysis was good for his time, but things have changed. We live in a different world now, you know? We live in different times, so Marx not applicable anymore, you know?
What is that?
That's the idiotic crap that we hear
Sure.
on a regular basis from people like ContraPoints.
Yeah, from people who are the largest leftist influencers, which is unfortunately a thing.
But like, it's not just like ContraPoints. You can look into like Culture of Narcissism by Lash. In there's a notation that Marx is outdated now because certain relations aren't valid in the same way that they were, which is bullshit. We'll get into that in just a second. But there's a problem here. People think things like Marx is outdated because things are different in some way now. I don't see any factories anymore. Where are the factories? Because that's all that Marx knew. But, like, here's the thing. The relations of exchange have been mystified. But it all comes back. Well, like, the reason why it's important to show that it all comes back to Marx is there's 2 things. The first thing is that if we don't know the relations of production, we don't know what the commodity actually is, then we can't easily know what the means are, what the means of production are, and therefore we don't necessarily know who owns it. The fundamental contradiction of capitalism is socialized production with a retained feudal mode of appropriation. In feudal times, people, they lived in their shop, they came downstairs and like cobbled shoes all day. And You had all the tools and materials to cobble the shoes. Somebody to come in and say, hey, I need some fucking shitty ass shoes because it's feudal times and shoes were garbage compared to they are now. And the guy would cobble and he'd give that and they'd pay him and he'd keep the profits because he's the only person involved. And that's the feudal mode of appropriation. Well, what happened when transitioning to capitalism was production was socialized. It wasn't just some guy in his house cobbling shitty ass shoes. It was machines that made good shoes and lots of people running them. But the guy who owned the machines kept the product. Same thing.
Let's talk about Uber.
Yeah. So Uber is taking the employer-employee relationship and changing like the legal ramifications of it. So when you're a contractor for Uber, you are not, legally speaking, an employee of Uber. Like, if for all intents and purposes, you act as an employee, you do what an employee would do. But the legal distinction is that you are technically a provider or a producer yourself. Legally speaking, you are running an individual business. Now, we're not talking about what you're actually doing. We're talking about legally speaking. You are not required to be provided benefits by Uber. You're not required various employee protections. At-will employment isn't even something you can negotiate over.
Do they have unions?
I don't think they could.
They could have an informal network of workers if they wanted to, but they don't have the like company infrastructure to create a union or advocate for themselves.
And the reason for that is that you're essentially always a part of a labor reserve army. You're never not part of that. You're always like checking an app for work.
Which is why that dumb fucking strike thing is so stupid.
Yeah.
They'll get somebody else to do it.
Speaking of which, did you guys see that the General Strike website, the one that we criticized because it didn't identify who was organizing the strike, did you see that it switched over to become a redirect to Victims of Communism? It goes to a site called Victims of Communism, which is an anti-communist propaganda site.
Fucking awesome.
But anyway, back to Uber. With Uber, you, as an individual, produce a commodity, which is the ride. You're not selling that commodity to the rider. Uber sells that commodity to the rider. That's how the transaction happens. While you are producing the ride, the owner of the means of production is ultimately Uber.
And a lot of people would argue that because the worker owns the car, that they own the means of production to give the ride.
Some might argue Uber is actually doing distribution here. That is not true. Uber owns the brand, Uber owns the app, and an Uber ride is 100% a different thing than me going out with my car and offering people, hey, if you give me $10, I'll drive you wherever you want. That's a different thing. That would be me owning the means of production. However, I would still not be engaging in socialized production. Uber, thanks to their app and thanks to the program that they've created, is engaging in socialized production. They have a reserve army of labor at the ready at all times to socialize this ride-sharing service they've created, and they appropriate the profits to themselves. That's the fundamental contradiction of capitalism. The gig economy was not something that Uber came up with.
But it's a perfect reflection of the contradiction of capitalism.
Yes.
And obscuring that through the independent contractor relationships.
The app itself is the means because it's the means to socialize the production. Strictly between the driver's relationship and Uber, they're selling a commodity to Uber. Yes, that commodity is their labor, the service that they're providing. It is not them owning the means of production, though.
Right.
Because they're selling their labor to the company. And therefore, an Uber ride is different than a ride.
Right.
Because an Uber ride is socialized production. Now that we have a basic understanding of Uber, let's move on to YouTube. A fella on Twitter says to me, YouTube is not means of production. We've been over this ad nauseum. Your cameras and computer are the tools of your labor. YouTube is where you circulate your commodities, videos, and viewers. Read Capital for once. For the love of God, it's not difficult. Now, YouTube is video Uber. I'm not an employee of YouTube. You're not an employee of YouTube.
And the commodity is not your video.
The video would be what they're arguing is the commodity.
Right. It's not, the video is not.
Now, the video, as a crystallization of my labor, is a commodity I am not necessarily selling to YouTube because I still own it, but I am licensing that commodity to YouTube. Now, this is what's interesting here. They don't give a shit about my fucking video. They don't want it. They don't want the rights to it because they don't care. And do you know why they don't care? Because their commodity is not my video. Their commodity is the viewer of the video and their attention and all of the data that is attached to them. That is YouTube's commodity. Because what YouTube does is display ads, which the user views, and YouTube makes money based on what they are paid by Pepsi or Hims, the erectile dysfunction medicine people, I don't know, to display an ad and take up that person's time. That's one aspect of YouTube's commodity. The other aspect, like I said, is the data that is attached to that user. So the data that is mined from that user, that is sold to not only advertisers, but also to other entities that use that data. Researchers, profiling companies, market research, etc. There's a ton of people who are interested in all of that data.
Wait, hold on. You might be freaking some people out there with that.
What?
The fact that these companies that operate through the internet don't have your best interest in mind and that they collect data on you. We now know this because Frances Haugen recently revealed this information to us. So I know that within the past couple weeks, since this is very new information, you're still processing that. So you should have probably put some kind of content trigger warning there.
Yeah, fair. Thanks, Frances Haugen. Thank you so much for showing us that Facebook primarily is concerned with profit and not the safety of its users. Thank you so much for that. Also, your Bernie friend was right. You're a turd.
Yeah, I would also stop being your friend, like I already said.
But so here's the deal. Can I go out and just give people rides for money? Yes. Could I make a video and sell it to somebody? Yes. The thing is, I would look like a fucking nut job if I were carrying around DVDs of my own videos and saying to people, look, $12, you can watch my videos. And they'd be like, sir, this is a Wendy's. The point I'm making here, though, is that YouTube is not simply a video market. If it were, it would be radically different from what it is now, because they aren't interested in selling you a video, in giving you the best video. They're interested in keeping you on their site. And to be fair, Uber probably does do data collection. That's probably an aspect of their business. They probably do commodify user data, whether it's driver or rider. I mean, you literally have location data tied to identities. Like, that's gold. There's no way they're not doing that.
I'm starting to think about that now, and that's like really scary. That's really scary. Jesus Christ.
Isn't
that's
it?
horrible.
Yeah.
That's so scary.
And they're just selling it to each other all willy-nilly.
That's really scary. I think oh man.
But basically, just for the sake of understanding this from a simple perspective, let's just assume that their commodity is the ride. It's more complicated for a YouTube video because the commodity is really not the video.
Right. These obscured relationships for things like YouTube, and even though it's a little bit easier to understand for Uber, it's very convenient for ostensibly invalidating a Marxist analysis of our current economic base. But it doesn't work that way.
No.
It's still fucking right. And the reason for that is because an inherent part of Marxism is its dialectical materialism and the expectation that these relationships change over time and society is in constant flux.
So here's the trick with like most rich popular creators. And this is really where the benefit of these obscuring of relationships starts to show itself. They're still not the owner of the means because the commodity is not their video, not the commodity that YouTube is selling anyway. What these YouTubers actually are labor aristocrats or professional managerial workers. Materially, they're workers, but they're often ideologically aligned with capital. And the reason for that is because they've kind of been fooled, just like a lot of people in this country have been fooled. They've told us all our entire lives, like, hey, you could make it if you do this,
Right.
this, and this. And they've been told they've made it. They've been told they're in control of their destiny, that they own what they're doing. Because YouTube, again, doesn't actually take ownership of their videos. They license them. It's you in control of your own destiny. It's you
my
making your
God.
own business. It's not. It's absolutely not. You are not the owner of a business, at least not by default. So it's really annoying that some people label YouTube creators petite bourgeoisie by default, because in their minds, petite bourgeoisie is you make a lot of money and I don't. But that's not what that is. Now, there is instances where YouTube creators petite bourgeoisie, if they are hiring other people to do work for them, if they are socializing production to make the video for YouTube, they are petite bourgeoisie.
And this is, oh my God, I need to take this fucking home, you guys. Are you ready? A Marxist scientific socialist analysis has nothing to do with someone's individual morals. Nothing. That's one of the many reasons why the envy video is bullshit. I morally think that striving for equity is a great thing. What the fuck ever. I am not moralizing independent members of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat and the labor aristocracy and the PMC. I'm not analyzing the morals of their decision making because it's not relevant. The reason that these relationships occur is because of the historical social context in which the economic base takes place. And that is how dialectically our economic relationships in society have developed over time. This has nothing to do with morals.
No.
At all. Moralizing individual rulers is like saying if only we had a good king or good duke, feudalism would work. And that's a fucking problem with these anarchoid and radlib people and with fucking land back, is if only we had indigenous landlords or landlords of color or more representation in electoral politics, things would be better. And guess what? The relationships will stay the same. The class divisions within those sociodemographically marginalized populations will steepen and further fuck over those populations.
The class distinction is the important thing. And this is the reason why it's so important. When you have people who look at rich YouTubers who are just making videos on their own, and they're thinking, oh, that's the petite bourgeoisie, or that's even the bourgeoisie. Those are the owners, the creators. They own their cameras, they own their editing software, and that means they're the producers. They own the means. Look at them making all of this money. That's evil. Let's say right here you have your everyday working person, and right here you have just Jeff Bezos. People are looking at YouTubers and they're going, that's the bourgeoisie. That's the enemy. That's the problem. And Jeff Bezos is way over the way the fuck over here.
To defend those people, but it's just the truth. And even the richest YouTubers that I fucking hate aren't there.
No.
And they themselves will even advocate for an ideology that suggests that they are closer to Jeff Bezos than us.
Well, they'll try to moralize about it and act like I understand. I am way up.
They'll check their privilege.
Yeah, they'll check their privilege, exactly. And here's the other end of it. There's the ContraPoints and the Lindsay Ellises, who are petite bourgeoisie. You look at the credits for their videos, and they are socializing the production. And, most specifically, they're retaining the feudal arrangement for appropriation. It's convenient for those types because they have a way to say Marx's analysis is outdated.
Right. And then just completely exonerate criticism of a capitalist base, even though aesthetically they're anti-capitalist. How awesome is that? It's just
For
like
them.
the fucking NPO thing.
It is.
It's having the aesthetics of advocacy for people who are marginalized or people who are oppressed, and just totally fucking them over through those aesthetics. And the other thing, too, is even if they are not petite bourgeoisie, they can still promote the ideology of the bourgeoisie.
Well, yeah.
In the same exact way that, like, your run-of-the-mill, like, very obviously working class person does. Most people in America do promote that ideology.
Well, you can talk to somebody at basically any place of work who's telling you, like, I'm going to make it someday. I'm going to be rich. I'm going to start this, and it's going to make me tons of money. I'm going to do that. It's going to make me tons of money. It's the ideology we're supposed to believe as American people. That's exactly what this is, too. When we start trying to act like YouTube creators are just automatically petite bourgeoisie because they own their cameras and editing software, what we ultimately do is we put a target on people who are not perpetrating the fundamental contradiction.
But it exonerates the bourgeoisie.
It does. And it gets everybody focused on the labor aristocracy and PMC, and you get shit like the fucking post left, where they can't stop fucking talking about how narcissistic certain groups are, which it's just like, that is getting us nowhere. Nowhere. Unless we're addressing the fundamental contradiction, unless we're moving forward with a program that is rooted in a Marxist, Leninist analysis, and therefore targeting the fundamental contradiction, the state, capital, class, etc., we're not going to get anywhere.
Again, all of this is working exactly how it's supposed to.
Exactly. Yeah.
The structure maintains the economic base, and that's how things work.
So we start to understand who is being targeted as like the bad guys in capitalism by leftists and socialists and communists. They need to understand that just because somebody makes like good-looking videos doesn't mean they're rich. Morally, it's independent of your class position. You can have good morals, you can have bad morals as any member of any class. It's irrelevant. The relationships are what we're talking about. And that's why it is important to take it back home to Marx every single time. While, yes, the exchange relations can change significantly, and we're seeing that happen as we watch the gig economy take over the rideshare industry, which used to be the taxi industry, as it takes over the entertainment industry with TikTok and YouTube and all of these things. Yeah, that stuff can happen. It's important, though, to understand the primary contradiction is still there, and it's still the main problem. These mystifications of what the commodity actually is via complicated exchange effectively obscure who the actual owners are, placing the impetus for the primary contradiction with people who don't own, aren't in the owning class, and thus leads us away from dealing with class itself. That's all for today. Thanks again for watching or listening. This is Pact. I'm Peter. This is Miss Astronaut Cowboy Doctor. To help us out, click like, follow, subscribe, whatever. Leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and Audible. To support us, become a patron at patreon.com/PactPod. That's PACDPOD. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.